everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Fireside Chat. My name is Dr. Ella Li, CEO of CGC Capital, and I will be the moderator for this Fireside Chat. Today, we'll talk about the technology innovation and the lesson learned from Silicon Valley. Now, I'm very proud to introduce our great speaker and also a great friend for this topic, Mr. Bill Reichert. Bill is a general partner at Pegasus Tech Ventures, managing investment in the US from the Silicon Valley headquarters. He has led Pegasus investment in medtech, AI, robotics, quantum computing, neuromorphics, space, life science, and other sectors. He's also the chief evangelist for Startup World Cup, a platform that connects and supports startup ecosystems all over the world. He has also authored many articles and delivered many speeches on entrepreneurship, venture capital, innovation, and other topics. Most recently, he co-authored a book for entrepreneurs called Getting to Wow, Silicon Valley Pitch Secrets for Entrepreneurs. The book premiered as #1 new release in venture capital in 2020. We will start a section by Bill's introductory talk for future innovation, followed by a conversation moderated by myself. Good to have you, Bill, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Ella, thank you so much. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here and to be part of this WISE 2022 event. So with that, shall I jump into my prepared remarks, and then you and I can have a fun back and forth Q&A session after that?
Yes.
What we want to talk about is the future of innovation, lessons from Silicon Valley. And so as Ella pointed out, I am now a venture capitalist, a partner at Pegasus Tech Ventures. But I actually started my career here in Silicon Valley as an entrepreneur. When I was a graduate student at Stanford, I actually started a software company. And as you can tell, that was a long time ago. And that was before it was fashionable for graduate students to start software companies. So I've been living in this innovation ecosystem for few decades now. And what I've noticed is actually the concept of innovation and the skills of innovators have evolved over the years. And it's important that we all understand how that change has happened and what indeed is the future of innovation. And so with that, what I'm going to do is talk about the top 10 lessons for innovators, investors, and corporate leaders. So with that, we have, I've got a fairly limited amount of time, so I'm going to rush through this topic, if I may, and that may generate some questions, and Ella and I could talk about it at the end. But top 10 lessons from Silicon Valley on the future of innovation. Lesson number 1, it turns out innovation, successful innovation, is not about invention. So traditionally, we thought that the secret to being an innovative organization was to invent new things, generate lots of patents, and come up with new products that nobody else had. Well, almost, but not quite. Really, the new way, the key to success is to focus on innovating, not inventing. And I try to explain this by talking about all of the world-changing inventions that we've had since 1945, since World War II, the last 75 years, we have had an explosion of new inventions, an explosion of new technologies. We've had sort of this amazing era in the history of the world where we have invented more new technologies than we ever had in the past, just in this last 75 years. And this is just a few of the world-changing innovations. But you look at all of these innovations and you think, okay, wait a second, Silicon Valley is the center of the universe of innovation. But look at this list. Very few, almost none of these new technologies were actually invented in Silicon Valley. That seems like a cognitive dissonance. How can that be? So maybe you can give Silicon Valley credit for inventing the microprocessor. Arguably, Intel invented the microprocessor, but all these other things came from somewhere else. So what made Silicon Valley so wildly successful? Well, it turns out it's not about inventing new technologies, it's about innovating. What did Apple invent? Apple did not invent the microcomputer. Apple did not invent the mouse. Apple did not invent the graphical user interface or the MP3 player. Apple did not invent the smartphone. It did not invent the iPad, the smart pad. Apple is a fast follower. Apple is not an inventing company. What did Google invent? Same thing. You look at Google. Google built its success on other people's technologies. It was certainly not the first search engine. It was certainly not the first email. It was certainly not the first ad tech company. What did Facebook invent? Again, Facebook did not invent a new technology. What they did was build on technologies that others had invented. And so the lesson is, innovation is more profitable than invention. You should focus on trying to find other technologies that you can put together in novel ways to build successful companies. So the definition of innovation is the novel commercialization of ideas, new or old. They don't have to be your ideas. They can be other people's ideas that you cobble together into successful commercial products. So that's lesson number one, the nature of innovation. Lesson number two has to do with corporate R&D. Again, traditionally, corporations thought that the secret to being successful was this protected internal R&D process. You hire a whole bunch of PhDs and you put them in the basement, lock the door, close the windows, and you tell them to invent stuff, right? But that's not the way it actually happens now. What we've learned in Silicon Valley is the most effective way to do your R&D is to tap into the innovation ecosystem, to tap into the startup world and use what is now called open innovation. The idea of open innovation arguably was invented by John Chambers at Cisco many, many years ago when he said, we got a lot of smart people here, but we don't have all the smart people in the world at Cisco. So let's tap all the smart people in the world by tapping into the startup world. Cisco, Intel, a number of other companies realized they were going to be much more successful with developing new products and innovative solutions by tapping into the startup world than just hiring a bunch of PhDs and putting them into an R&D center. The third lesson about innovation has to do with corporate culture. Now, traditionally, organizations think that the key to success is either command and control on the one hand or cultivating consensus on the other. So that's the way most corporations work. So if you're in Asia, probably it's cultivating consensus. If you're in New York City, probably it's command and control. It depends on where you are. But what we've learned in Silicon Valley is that the right way to develop a successful corporate culture is to cultivate diverse thinking and tap the power of different perspectives. And I generally try to explain this using this parable, the parable of the optimist, the pessimist, and the engineer. And the parable goes something like this. The optimist is the one who looks at the glass and says, hey, this is half full. The pessimist is the one who looks at the same glass and says, no, this is half empty. And the engineer is the one who looks at the same glass and says, this glass was engineered to be twice as big as it needs to be. But I'm bummed, right? Sort of a joke. But the point of the story is the same set of facts, but three different perspectives. And that's what you want in your organization. And in your organization, you've got to allow those perspectives to come out. But if you let people, if you recruit people with different perspectives, and then you let them express their perspectives, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is they're going to start fighting. And when I was an entrepreneur, I thought, oh my God, that's a bad thing. We're yelling at each other in the conference room because we were disagreeing about some strategic plan. But it turns out that's how high-performing teams operate. High-performing teams tap the power of creative conflict. And so if you look at the highest performing teams, what you will be surprised at is how much conflict there is inside of Apple, inside of Microsoft, inside of a lot of Intel and Oracle. there's a lot of conflict. It's not a bad thing as long as you create the right culture that says we want to hear from everyone and we want to then respect their points of view, argue it respectfully, and then make a decision. And so some people have coined the phrase, disagree, then commit. So you listen to the perspectives, you come to a decision, and the deal is you can't sabotage the decision. Someone who tries to sabotage a decision they disagree with, they're off the bus. But that's the secret to high-performing teams, which leads us to lesson number 4, leadership. Leadership is probably the most discussed term in management and the least understood, right? So traditionally, again, we think of leadership as leaders are the people that hire followers. Leaders are the people that have followers. And, a lot of founders kind of like that idea of, being the leader and having a bunch of followers, right? You don't want to create that kind of organization. The best, most successful organizations are those where leaders hire leaders. Now, a lot of people look at me and say, Bill, that's crazy. You can't have everybody leading, but you have to have everyone be capable of leading in their particular domain. So if we were all together in a room, I would love to go through this sort of discussion of what is it that makes a good leader. And if we had more time, and maybe we can talk about it, Ella, I don't know, but you ask a group of people what makes for a good leader, and what you're going to get is as many different answers as there are people in the room. And so generally what you find is people say something like a good leader sets goals, listens, makes decisions, projects confidence, has integrity, shows humility, delegates authority, instills urgency, is resilient, et cetera, right? So you think of all these things that you want in a good leader, and you look at this list, which could be much, much longer, and you say, why would you want to hire anyone who isn't like this, right? These are the characteristics you want on everyone on your team if you want to be able to scale. You've got to be able to push decisions to the edge. You've got to be able to give people authority and responsibility to lead in their domain. Which leads to lesson number 5, which has to do with how do you lead as a company in your marketplace. Now, almost everyone, every entrepreneur likes to say, the first mover has an advantage. We're first movers. That's our advantage. Well, it turns out, history has shown, and we know in reality, that the first mover has a disadvantage. And so what you want to be is a fast follower. Because, if you're a first mover, you've got to educate the marketplace. You've got to figure out the supply chain. You've got to create demand. But if you're a fast follower, all that work has been done for you. And so you look at the most successful companies in history and you say, interesting. Amazon was not a first mover in online e-commerce. They were not a first mover in cloud. What have they been a first mover in? Spotify was not a first mover in streaming music. Netflix was not a first mover in streaming video. Sony was, arguably invented the pocket transistor radio, but they were not a first mover in transistor radios either. So all of these companies built their success not as first movers, but rather as fast followers. So that's the lesson that you want to learn as an organization. Don't worry about being the first one out there. And in fact, if you are the first one out there, it's okay. It's okay. But just understand it's going to be really expensive and it's going to take longer than you thought. So, yeah, Intel was the first mover in microprocessors. Boy, that was tough. Boy, that was tough. If you look at the history of Intel, they pretty much decided, nah, microprocessors is tough. We're going to focus on DRAM. Cisco was the first mover in routers, and that was a little bit easier, but it still was a long, tough slog to get people to adopt this new technology. So it's okay to be a first mover, but just understand it's not really an advantage. It's actually a disadvantage. So lesson number 6 has to do with competitive strategy. Traditionally, we think of the world of competition is all about destroying the other companies in your sector, right? We win, you lose. That's sort of the standard business school approach to teaching how to compete. You want to crush the competition. But what we've learned more recently is there's a different way to compete, and that's the collaborative ecosystem way, where we win, you win. So there's this concept of creating competitive ecosystems where you can collaborate or co-opetition, use an approach called co-opetition, by working together in the ecosystem, either through creating standards together, creating, doing sort of joint marketing efforts, or creating a platform that you share to distribute or to run your ecosystem or marketplace. Lesson number 7 has to do with the attitude toward failure. This is the famous story of Silicon Valley, that here in Silicon Valley, we embrace failure. Well, almost, not quite, but traditionally in business and traditionally in culture, failure is not an option, right? We are raised in schools, we're raised in corporations. Don't make a mistake, get a perfect grade, right? But that's not the way innovation works. That's not the way startups work. The reality is failure is a necessity. The classic quote is, if you take a shot, you may miss, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Innovation is much more like a sport, say basketball, than it is like school, where you got to get a perfect grade on the test. And so you got to practice, you got to take shots. You're going to miss a bunch of your shots, but unless you take a lot of shots, you're not going to learn a lot. And you just got to figure out how to take the best shots, as many as you can. So frequently what we've learned is failure is the best way to learn. My favorite example of this is one of our portfolio companies, SpaceX, did a test launch in January of 2020. This was the test launch. As you can see, the rocket blew up. You think, oh my God, that's terrible, that's horrible. Well, the reality is, for this particular test launch, they intended the rocket to blow up because they wanted to test, the failure mechanisms to see what would happen. Can people survive in this capsule if the rocket blows up? And that was the point of the test. You could have simulated it, you could have guessed, but they said, to hell with it. We're just going to blow up the rocket and see what works. And it was a powerful, powerful learning mechanism. Google also is famous for celebrating failure. Lesson number 8, profit strategy. Traditionally, we've learned in business school, and corporations think that the key to being more profitable is to drive down costs. That's sort of historically been the way that corporations have thought about the pathway to profitability. But in the digital world, in the world of innovation, what we've learned is that the secret is not driving down costs. The secret is driving up value. And so, that's pretty key in healthcare as a good example, but also key in technology. An example of the cost mindset versus the value mindset. The cost mindset says, let's build a cheaper Nokia phone, right? The value mindset says, let's build an insanely expensive Apple iPhone. Who won and why, right? So Apple won because the key that the market wanted was value, not discount. So the lesson we have in this modern age, this digital world, is you design for abundance. You design for more compute power. You design for more bandwidth, more storage, more people on the network, for scale. That's abundance, and that both increases value and increases your opportunity for margin and profit. Then lesson number 9 has to do with the role of ecosystem stakeholders. Traditionally, around the world, what we see is that governments are driving the innovation ecosystem. We're very proud here in Silicon Valley that, it was the private sector. Well, the reality is government had a lot to do with it. There's a lot of government money that has historically flowed through Silicon Valley, either through Stanford and Berkeley or directly through Lockheed and other companies like that. But nevertheless, what's really important, what we've discovered around the world with ecosystems, is key to the success of an ecosystem is that industry get involved, that corporations get involved. And this is now what we're seeing as the rise of corporate venture capital. Corporations directly focusing on the innovation ecosystem. And then lesson number 10, what's the role of technology in innovation? You know, traditionally here in Silicon Valley, we always thought that technology drives innovation. And that led to a very product-centric mentality here in the Valley. What we learned over time was product-centric was not good enough. And what we had to understand is that the reality is people drive innovation. You know, not just people on your team or people who are your partners, obviously your customers make the difference. Can they use it? And one of the things we see, for example, in medtech is it doesn't matter how cool the science and technology is of a device. If the nurses hate it and the doctors hate it, then it ain't going to get adopted, right? So you've got to pay attention to people, not just technology. So another couple of examples is you think of Airbnb, you think of Uber. What technology products do these companies sell? These are not technology companies. At the end of the day, Airbnb is not a technology company, it's a trust company. You have to trust the person who's going to show up at your apartment. You have to trust the landlord who's going to take you in. Uber is the same. You got to trust the driver. You got to trust the passenger. These are not technology companies. These are trust companies. And trust is all about people, not technology. So with that, my sort of one of the key lessons that I learned long time ago was that customers don't buy products, they buy benefits. And that is the key point that every entrepreneur has got to understand is don't focus on the technology, don't focus on the product, focus on what value you can deliver to your customers. And that, in fact, is the core meaning of Getting to Wow, the book that I recently published, but I'm not going to hype that now. Instead, here are the top 10 lessons on innovation. Focus on innovation, not invention. Invest in open innovation. Tap into the innovation ecosystem. Embrace diverse teams and tap creative conflict. Build a team of leaders, not a team of followers. Don't worry about being first, but be a fast follower. Win through collaboration. Don't punish failure, encourage experimentation. Focus on adding value, not reducing costs. Understand that industry drives innovation, not government, and that people drive success, not technology. So with that, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I hope I didn't run too long. How are we doing on time, Ella? Let me stop the share.
You're perfect. Although I wish we could have longer time. Oh my goodness. I put every single point you just mentioned, and those are really the great lessons and also the take-home message for all of our audience. Terrific. I really learned. Also enjoy a lot. Yeah. So Bill, now as a Silicon Valley venture capitalist with decades of experience, can you please share with our audience your own investment strategy and approach? How do you make investment decisions? How do you find your next unicorn?
Well, you know, so venture capital is a process, right? And it's a multi-stage process. And the first part of the process is finding the best entrepreneurs with the most brilliant companies, right? So historically and traditionally, you know, Sand Hill Road venture capital thought, hey, you know, we're the masters of the universe. Any entrepreneur who is worth his or her salt, they'll figure out how to get to us. Well, the world has changed now. And so if you're going to be a successful investor in the current world, you've got to be out there. You've got to go out there and reach out and touch the entrepreneur community more broadly than just Silicon Valley, around the world. It's now a global innovation ecosystem. And so, you know, step one from my point of view and the Pegasus point of view is get out there, reach out to the entrepreneurial world, find the brilliant entrepreneurs wherever they are on the planet, and then embrace them. So, you know, the challenge, of course, is not every entrepreneur that you embrace winds up being a brilliant entrepreneur. And one of the horrible parts of venture capital, I mean, don't cry for me, but you know, one of the challenges of venture capital is that our reality is that, you know, we have to say no to 99.8% of the entrepreneurs that we come across. And it's, you know, so that's tough. So that's the hard work that we have to do. It's the brutal work for the entrepreneurs, is we've got to filter through these companies. We got to get to know them quickly and understand what is their core value proposition. And so that's the key thing that we look for, is there a compelling value proposition? And so I try to help entrepreneurs understand that point. And that point is, you got to get to wow. In other words, you have to have a compelling value proposition if you want to get our attention. So a compelling value proposition means that you can deliver 10x benefits to your target customer base. And hopefully it's obvious to your target customer base. So then as a VC, as an investor, we got to figure out how to work with the entrepreneur, how to build a syndicate of good investors around that company, and then how to add value and help the entrepreneur be most successful. And so that's an interesting balance, because a lot of entrepreneurs don't want us to be too involved, right? It's their company, and that's fair. It's their company. But we want to be there for the entrepreneur to help them where we can and when we can, with things like introductions to our corporate network, to do, proof of concept pilots, potentially licensed business development, acquisition. So we try to add value. Whenever we look at a company, we look for opportunities for adding value, both directly or indirectly through our network. And that's, so it's not a short, simple, sweet, single, point in terms of what it takes to be an investor, to be a successful investor. It's this combination of factors that you've got to build over a period of years.
So basically, you look at a company, when you look at the company as your potential investment portfolio, one of the conditions where the thing you would think is how, and also whether you can really help them to grow together with them. That becomes really also important for you guys. Yes,
exactly. That is part of the way we think about it, because we know, no entrepreneur can do it alone, right? The entrepreneur needs a team broadly defined. That team includes, co-founders and the team around immediately in the company, but advisors around the company, and then support mechanisms beyond the advisory board. And that's kind of where we want to come in, is find ways where we can add value to make that success more likely. So part of the calculation in terms of the future value of a company has to do with where their key requirements are, where the key opportunities are for adding value, for helping them accelerate their success, and the likelihood of our being able to help and accelerate their success.
Great. So now entering 2022, how has COVID-19 positively or negatively impacted the decision-making process?
Well, okay, so there's the decision-making process, and then there's the sectors, right? I mean, so the effect it's had on the decision-making process sort of at the first level is the question of, is a company positively or negatively impacted by COVID, right? So unfortunately, in terms of our decision-making process, we sort of shifted our mix somewhat, because COVID was a negative impact on a bunch of sectors, like, hospitality, some of the consumer sectors. It was a positive impact on other sectors like health tech, med tech, and logistics at some level, and also some other funny ones like gaming and other certain consumer apps. So it affected the way we sort of think about target areas. Then early on, we were highly anxious about not being able to, press the flesh, right? To meet the entrepreneurs face to face, to see the body language between the members of the team. That, historically, I always leaned a lot on the site visit and just watching the way people behave. We know when a VC shows up, people do not behave naturally anyway, but you can still sort of, see through a little bit of that, right? Is the team working together, or is there a lot of anxiety and defensiveness? And, is there a sort of alpha dog and whatever? I mean, there's all sorts of dynamics on the team that we generally look for that was harder to do on Zoom. The advantage, though, was that we could talk to so many more companies because of Zoom. Aside from the fact that, you could fit 8, 9, 10 meetings into a day. And in the old days, maybe 3 or 4, right? Oh, you got to go to lunch and then you do this, right? Whatever. So Zoom certainly gave us the opportunity to touch more entrepreneurs, to meet more entrepreneurs, both just time during the day, but also geographically. And so in the first, so COVID hit March of 2020, we made our first investment in a company that we had never met in July of 2020. So we found this company, we spent a lot of time talking with them. We talked to their customers, we talked to their investors, we talked to their competitors. And finally, we pulled the trigger and we made an investment in this company, which happened to be in India. We would never have invested in this company in the old world, because we just, the idea of investing in a company in India, without having a site visit, without, that was something that would have been tough to get through pre-COVID. But COVID created this new world of decision making that enabled us to get over it. The company, it's a gaming company called Mobile Premier League, based in India, that has soared, has been, we were relatively early investors, and now it's, well into unicorn status. So we are feeling as though, maybe the old idea that you had to be close to and meet in person is not really true. And Zoom seems to have proven that. So it has changed the way we think about the way we do diligence and make investment decisions.
So now, do you think after COVID-19, would you do a more combination way to use Zoom, for instance, to meet with all this company in a virtual way, but still meet them in person or on site before the final close? Do you think you're going to go that way?
I think we will see a substantial percentage of investments done purely remotely. I think, where there is the opportunity to have face-to-face, we will take that, we will pursue that. But we won't limit ourselves to companies that we can visit face-to-face. What we will do, and what we have been doing, is make sure that we have a local partner that we trust, that has met the team face-to-face. So more recently, we just invested in a company in the Philippines. Again, 3 guys out of university started this extraordinary company. It's taken off like a rocket. We've never, we had a lot of Zoom meetings, but what we did is we found a local VC, in Manila, that great team, great background, great experience. And we syndicated with them, and they spent time face-to-face with the team. They saw their office. And so we used that as our proxy when investing in this company, 8,000 miles away.
Nice. So now it comes to my favorite question. What is the biggest challenge and also hurdle you ever had during your investment career?
Well, okay. So there's challenges, there's hurdles, and there's mistakes, right? And I'm not sure which one. So no, the sort of in my investment career, if you think about experiences that were the toughest, purely the toughest experiences was the meltdown in 2008. it was, it was absolutely extraordinary to be a VC in that era. And, I mean, it affected a whole bunch of people in a whole bunch of different ways, but, I had also lived through the bubble and the bubble bursting. When the bubble burst, it was, oh, well, too bad. It was fun while it lasted, but okay, now let's get back to work. When the meltdown happened, what most people refer to as the global financial crisis, to September 15th, 2008. I mean, boom, a date that shall live in infamy, was just a mind-boggling experience. And for those of you who missed it, I mean, our board meetings after that, one of the most significant topics of discussion was our cash safe in the banks where we had cash? I mean, it was unimaginable in Silicon Valley to have that conversation prior to the meltdown, to be worried about whether your cash was safe in the bank, and to have, CFOs sort of bouncing across banks to try to diversify, to make sure if one of the banks failed that we wouldn't lose millions of dollars of, investment cash. It was unbelievably bad. And of course, business stopped. I mean, it was just unbelievably bad. So that was, in terms of just, wow, not being able to sleep. That was the toughest, biggest challenge, was coping through the global financial crisis. In terms of biggest mistakes, that's a somewhat longer list, but the one that just always, particularly now that we are investors in SpaceX, the one that particularly grates was that I was pretty close to, one first round investor in Tesla. This is way back when Tesla was starting. And, we had Garage Technology Ventures, and we thought, hey, Garage, car company, that makes sense. We should be investors. And so we met with the founding team. The CEO then was a guy named Marty Eberhard, who was this crazy guy, brilliant, but crazy. This is before Elon was there. So this is before Elon was there. Elon was actually not a founder of Tesla. But Elon saved Tesla, but I thought it would be cool to invest in an electric car company, but boy, it's going to take a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's never going to work out the way that the founders thought it would work out. And the history was, I was absolutely right. Tesla had 3 near-death experiences before they actually broke out. But I'll tell you, nevertheless, I still wish I had invested back then. That was, you can be right and still be wrong.
But had you had such experience, like an opportunity again in front of you, how would you avoid yourself, making similar? Right.
No, and so that's fast forward a number of years, and now we're investors in SpaceX. Talk about a crazy idea, right? Talk about a crazy idea, but there's a whole bunch of sort of elements that even if it's harder than we think and it takes longer, there's a whole bunch of underlying elements there that give us high confidence that SpaceX can work through a variety of challenges that they face, and that the potential for the company is huge, right? So one of the things you get with experience, right? So one of the things you get being around a while is you see a whole bunch of different pathways to success, and you can understand. The other thing you learn as a VC is, don't believe in the model that the entrepreneur is pitching you as the ultimate model of the company or the only model for the company. And so we're going through this right now with another company where it's a brilliant idea, but it's a terrible business model. And so, we're having this conversation about, okay, how is there an opportunity for the company to pursue maybe a couple of models to see what works, rather than being, just absolutely dedicated to this one model that we think is highly, highly risky. So, that's another issue for, the discussion between VCs and entrepreneurs.
So if you see a company, as you said, a company with great technology, also great team, great scientists, a great group. However, if they have really horrible business idea, is that a type of a company you would consider spending time to help them go to the right direction, or you think, okay, I'm not going to waste the time on that? What is your general solution for that one?
Well, this gets to, the question of a very dicey topic between VCs and entrepreneurs, is this issue of, do you want an entrepreneur who is, a passionate visionary who is going to, go at it 1,000% and not let anything stop him or her, right? And, that's sort of what we want. That's kind of what we say. But on the other hand, for myself and most of my colleagues, what we want is, we use the word coachability, right? So we want, I don't particularly like that word, because sometimes entrepreneurs take it the wrong way. It sounds at some level deprecating, to say, oh, you need to be coached. But, the point I try to make to entrepreneurs is, you cannot have all the right answers, all the time. And so, what coachability is about, it's really about the ability to listen. The ability to listen and the ability to figure out, when do I need to get more information and listen to others versus when do I need to make a decision? And that, that comes with, again, a combination of experience and, instinct. And so we want to see a team that is quote unquote coachable. Again, every successful Olympic athlete has a coach, right? So coachability is not inherently a bad thing. No entrepreneur should think that somehow having a coach is diminishing in any way. So coachability is the ability to listen to others and, adjust based upon better information. And so that's, to your question, if we see some, sort of amazingly brilliant opportunity, and we think that for some reason the team hasn't yet seen the right path, our tendency is going to be to say, well, are you going to test these different approaches, or are you not going to bother and you've decided there's only one approach, right? If the team says no, forget about it, this is the only way to go, and we disagree, again, we could be wrong, but if we think that's just too challenging to go that way, then we're going to move on. We're going to look for the next opportunity. So one of when I was a young pup, believe it or not, when I was a young pup in Silicon Valley, one of the gods of Silicon Valley, one of the founders of Silicon Valley, was a gentleman named Reed Dennis, who founded Institutional Venture Partners. And Reed told me one day, Bill, you don't have to swing at every pitch. There will be another good pitch that you can swing at. And that's right. That's true. I mean, as much as every entrepreneur thinks that their company is the only company that anyone should ever invest in, from a VC, from an investor point of view, it just makes sense to find the right fit, and like anything else in life, the right fit is not sort of a, sort of universal constant. It varies from team to team, from sector to sector, from period to period. And so finding that right fit is important. And so we will move on if we don't think it's a good fit.
Makes sense. So in the introductory talk, you gave a really great lessons to not only entrepreneurs, but also investors, how to find a great successful company, and also for as an entrepreneur, how to run a successful company. Now, can you talk from technology perspective, in next 3 to 5 years, what can be the most promising technology innovation and also trend?
Yeah, so, it's interesting when I would develop that list of inventions since 1945, what I thought, and I did that, around 2008, 2009 is when I first started having this, sort of thought about the difference between innovation and invention. And since then, I've been thinking, okay, what world-changing inventions have been brought to the innovation ecosystem since 2008? And I mean, I wish we were all together. I'd love to hear everybody's thought. What world-changing inventions have been brought to market since 2008? And it's not obvious. I mean, because, by 2008, we had the smartphone, right? The smartphone has made a lot. It's been a platform for a lot of stuff, right? But, so we've had, a lot of these, inventions that have enabled, changes in the world up until 2008. And what have we had since 2008? Well, the one that sort of screams at us, and it depends on your timing, is CRISPR, right? And so CRISPR is sort of one of the game-changing inventions that we've had in the last, whatever, 12 years, 13 years, whatever the time frame is now. And I don't know, I'm not sure when you get to say CRISPR was quote unquote invented, because I'm sure all of the MD PhDs in the audience right now will say, Bill, no, that was long before, right? Okay. But, from an innovation ecosystem point of view, CRISPR really did not hit the, Silicon Valley and the biotech world until the last 10 years. And now there's been this explosion of companies that have been built around the idea of using CRISPR to do, a variety of things. And so, interesting question whether we feel as though it has made as big an impact as we would have thought or not. And I'd love to get an audience poll on that one. But we are just seeing, all sorts of really, really interesting life science types of opportunities that have been enabled because of CRISPR. And obviously, that whole domain has exploded also, in the more broad concept of gene editing, around the vaccines and things like that. So that, I think, is sort of the, looking back, people are going to, sort of look at this era as being, the era when CRISPR, dramatically changed the world. The other big thing in medtech healthcare is the COVID event, right? Which is, there's a little bit of overlap around the vaccine, but the other impact, the other big thing that COVID has done that's going to transform the whole business of healthcare and medtech and all of that is digital and remote. And so, because COVID imposed this problem of delivering healthcare, we've had this explosion of remote and this explosion of digital around supporting remote, and And so I think that's the other thing. We're going to look back and say, yeah, we were talking about digital in medicine for decades, and God bless Epic, the company that everybody hates, but we have sort of medical record, sort of digital medical records now. Yeah. But no, I mean, I think digital remote, and then of course the overlay of AI on top of digital. And that's, and then more broadly across technology beyond healthcare. I think the other thing that we're going to look back on this era and sort of see was this, unfortunately slower than we thought, but eventually extraordinarily high impact of AI, of machine vision, machine learning, and a variety of different AI technologies, in medicine and healthcare and diagnostics, but also the domain that I think we're going to see the biggest impact in is a variety of types of automation, not just factory automation, but process automation. And so the big, my big sort of bet is that this whole domain of process automation has now cracked open, because now AI has gotten mature enough that everybody can use it, and now it can be applied practically in a wide range of situations. 5 years ago, when everybody was excited about AI, it was too early. It was, all those first movers. Yeah, I mean, there are some that have survived, but AI was a bad place to be a first mover, especially considering that, the first movers in AI were moving 60 years ago. Is that about right? But, my quip about, the impact of AI was that, I was very distressed that maybe my first investment in AI, when I made my first investment in AI, I thought maybe I'm too late. And then I explained to the audience that I did my first investment in AI in 1989. That was, and I thought, I missed the tsunami, right? But in any case, yeah, I mean, so AI, AI has overpromised and underdelivered for many decades now. But I do think what we're seeing is a lot of very practical applications of AI, as opposed to, sort of deep science, deep tech. You don't have to, yeah. And autonomous cars are a good example of overpromising and underdelivering. We can get a certain amount of autonomy in our vehicles, pretty easily thanks to AI, but, truly autonomous cars, it's still a ways away. But everybody was promising, oh no, Bill, no, by 2016, 2018 at the latest, we'll have autonomous cars all over the place. No, it doesn't move that quick.
Yeah, I agree. If you're also looking at definitely the role of AI in healthcare and innovation, also looking at the reason we could have all this COVID-19 vaccine coming out so quickly, it's all thanks to the application of AI in drug discovery. So definitely also like a revolutionizing the world. So the last question is, now we have a lot of audience are the entrepreneurs. So can you please share with them what are the most common mistakes for those entrepreneurs? And if you want to give some advice, what would it be?
Yeah. Well, and for the sake of time, I will suggest also that everybody, if you go on YouTube, Dred, I wish I remember what the name of it is, but there's a video I did for Pegasus. I think it's called the Top 10 Common Mistakes That Entrepreneurs Make, or maybe it's just Common Mistakes That Entrepreneurs Make. And then there's another video, which is called the Top 10 Terrible, Horrible, Very Bad Slides. And so The first one has to do with the way you manage your company. The second one has to do with the way you pitch your company. And so on the pitch side, which is I guess, from a VC point of view, the challenge that the mistake that most entrepreneurs make is they spend their time describing their product. And, they're excited about the technology, about the software stack, about, the flow charts, about whatever, their product naming, whatever. So they spend their time, because that's what absorbs them during the day is getting this product right? That's what happens. And then they talk to investors and they spend their time talking about the product. And that's, of course we need to know about the product, but the single most important thing as an entrepreneur for you to be crystal clear about is what is your compelling value proposition and who realizes it, right? For whom? So if you can articulate in 20 seconds your compelling value proposition, and who realizes it, and establish some credibility that it's 10 times better than what's available to your target market, that's what I call your wow. Your wow is your compelling value proposition. That's what causes us to go, wow, that's amazing, tell me more, not, your software stack or your product design or, any of that, or even your market size, right? So that's, so that's top 10 terrible, horrible, very bad slides, or you can just buy the book, Getting to Wow, right? So that's on the pitch side. On the business side, common mistakes that entrepreneurs make are, to the point we made earlier, committing to a go-to-market too quickly before they've tested alternatives. So again, do you sell a medical device direct to consumer, or do you go through hospitals and clinics? Maybe it's obvious, maybe it isn't, but maybe what you need to do is do the work to figure out which one's going to work better. Being the other sort of big mistake that entrepreneurs make is misunderstanding the sales cycle. This is related. Misunderstanding the sales cycle and the conversion cycle. Every entrepreneur is delusional about how fast customers are going to embrace their product or service. And so it's just so easy for an Excel spreadsheet to show this hockey stick revenue ramp when, if you just peer below the surface and you realize, no, they're going to pilot the product first. They're going to test it. They're going to buy a little bit of it before they buy a lot of it. It's going to take a longer time to roll it out than they say that it is. All of these things take more time than almost every entrepreneur is willing to admit. And so that's really the killer is when you misunderstand the sales cycle and your cash burn is inconsistent with your sales cycle reality. That's where you run out of money before you've proven the company, and that's where you get into trouble. So that's just a couple of challenges that entrepreneurs make. But again, you can go on Google and find some other comments I've made on the topic.
Or just Google and also buy the book, Getting to Wow, Silicon Valley Pitch Secrets for Entrepreneurs. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, so now we come to the end of this Fireside Chat, and I want to thank you, Bill, again for your great insights and also sharing and also thoughts. And I bet our audience find this section also being extremely, extremely helpful. Thank you so much, Bill.
My pleasure, and I wish the best to all of you. And it should be pretty easy to find me if you're looking to track me down. I'm Bill at PegasusVentures.com. So.